Coming up, as the Brooklyn Nets look to continue their hot homestand against the Atlanta Hawks, we turn our attention to the NBA power rankings, where, yes, the Nets are surging. How much can we read into their placement among the rankings? Who else is higher, lower, better, worse? And what does it mean as we continue to work our way towards that midpoint of the NBA season?
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Arbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast. My boy, Andy Mack. We thank you for making us your first listen today, free on all those great platforms, and let you know today's episode is brought to you by Bet Online. Bet Online has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. Bet Online, it's where the game starts. And Doug, where we start is taking a look at the constantly being updated here. We'll give the context on ESPN, who's contributing and how they're formulating these opinions around the NBA power rankings and where the Brooklyn Nets are seeing a little bit of action, a little bit of traction.
Yeah, so sometimes it's good to take stock of like where the rest of this sort of industry views a team. There's a couple different ways to do that. There's like through independent analysis of just, in this case, ESPN's writers and experts. There's also betting markets, which I find to be far more reliable than opinions, because that's where people actually put money. And I think as we'll look with some of these power rankings, I can't imagine a world where some people would put money on some of these teams over another ones. And that's where I do find power rankings, they're great fodder for sure. Like to just view how the rest of the league is kind of viewing your team. And the Nets have been one of the all-time most difficult teams to evaluate where they stand in the overall NBA hierarchy. We're season over season over season with this one. So that's nothing new. Yeah, but some of these power ranking pieces where the Nets rank is like, in some ways I find it correct. And then in other ways, I do find some of these other teams in there to be like kind of head scratchers.
Well, and this is like the difference between, because you bring up betting, it's like the difference between the season-long projection, right? The championship title odds, the things that maybe get moved on the margins of a big, obviously, like seismic trade that could happen at the deadline. Whereas power rankings are basically like it's taking the temperature on a week-to-week basis. Where do we think these teams are? How are teams performing? And it kind of, in a lot of ways, is irrespective of championship odds. It's just who's playing good ball right now, right?
Yeah.
And for the Brooklyn Nets, from that standpoint, you have to be buoyed if you scroll over there onto ESPN. And just to give you the full context on it, as we said from the top here, they are ranking all 30 teams from top to bottom, taking stock of which teams are playing best basketball right now and which teams are by the way, it does say in here, most like title contenders. So there is a little bit, to Doug's point about where I'll probably start disagreeing with some of these. However, when we specifically look over at the Brooklyn Nets, they are among the risers, Doug, because they are sitting there at 13th right now, previously at 17th. This came out yesterday or 2 days ago, just before the Charlotte Hornets game. So obviously, when you hold off those pesky Hornets, that's probably worth another 6 or 7 spots potentially in the power rankings. As Nick Friedel notes, though, in his write-up on where the Nets currently stand, 13th, yes, it's been great. Kevin Durant received Eastern Conference Player of the Week honors last week when he was averaging 33.7 rebounds and 5.5 assists, but it comes at the price of playing 37 minutes per game. Just on a pulse of where the team is right now, are you excited by the fact that they are top 15 in the league after the way this season started?
I think I'm like, it's so funny because we get lost in this kind of quagmire of how to think about the Nets. And this is just, again, another example of why I was just kind of maybe sort of joking, but not really a minute ago about evaluating this team is easily the most difficult thing that anybody has had to do in the NBA over the last couple of years. And this season is no different.
We do it great.
Like, It's just, well, I just like in a macro sense. I think in a micro sense, we're able to really drill down pretty well on what the Nets' needs are and the things they do really well and things they don't really well. But this, again, and the reason we're talking about the power rankings is not so much to tout like that they're excellent. It's just to tout that it's just to prove once again that on a season long basis, evaluating the Nets is really hard. So on the one hand, where it's like 13th, am I happy? I don't really care so much, except that like I do find it really interesting about how they're viewed as a team. And I think more than anything else, my guess is here on betting markets and really anywhere, the range of outcomes for them is much wider than almost any other team. And I think this is where it becomes really, really hard to evaluate them. Like their range can range all the way up to championship level, right? With like certain things that if certain things could be done and dialed in, this team can rank, can definitely go that high over the course of a season, I think, with like a few tweaks. They can also head right for the lottery with a couple other tweaks going the other way. And I don't think, and frankly, not even necessarily injury related. And so I think that is where it becomes, again, like wash, rinse, repeat about trying to figure out this team, as opposed to, because if you look at some of the other teams in their range, they're 13th. And just a real quick roll through this list. It's the Celtics, the Bucks, the Suns, the Pelicans. I don't think anyone would throw too much at that ranking. The Cavs 5, fine. 6 Grizzlies, 7th Nuggets, 8 Clippers. Okay, well now we're starting to try to like predict about what's going to happen. 9 Kings. Look, are they going to be top 10 team over the course of the season? I would say almost definitely not. Warriors at 10. How long are they going to stick here? Right? They're only going to go but up. I'm only saying this because summing up these teams for some of them is actually pretty easy. Mavericks 11. That seems right. Blazers, they have a pretty wide range of outcomes too. And then the Nets. And so it's like, yeah, could the Nets easily jump into the top 5 here in a few weeks? I don't think, with Simmons back healthy and all this and some other things going right. Yeah, I think so. Could they drop down to 20th here without too much going on? Like, I probably not. But it's just such a funny. It just more points to just what a weird place we are with this team, and this is what it's like being a fan of this team. Like, you just kind of don't know.
Yeah, it's interesting because you bring up that, like, because I would say, so on the one hand, because we've talked about these games and we've seen sometimes the comments, and it's ironic that we came into the season wanting to like put our best positive foot forward around this team, and the Brooklyn Nets did everything to stymie that approach from us. And we've seen some fans say, "Hey, they're winning ball games, right? Like, just be happy that they are winning games." And I think that we've stepped ourselves back from, everything need not be viewed through a championship lens. But I do find it interesting because the Kings are a good example of this. Okay, do we think they're going to be there in the end? Probably not. But if we're just talking about, hey, are you winning more ball games than you're losing? Are you playing good basketball? Okay, that's why you are where you are. In the Nets case, I have a little bit of a pause around the idea that, hey, you're 13th right now. You were just 17th, and you're beating teams. But on the micro, you go and you see the teams you're playing, and even the Charlotte game last night. By the way, you want to talk about like when a win isn't totally worth a win, and I know people might troll me over this, but I'd say you should drop in the rankings. You narrowly held off the Charlotte Hornets. You probably deserve to drop a spot, right? Like, because the teams you play and the way in which you win does matter. In the grand scheme, it doesn't matter as much, but on a game-to-game, week-to-week basis, your opponents do matter, and the way that those get weighted does matter. And it's funny that, like, when Friedel points out Kevin Durant, Eastern Conference Player of the Week, and what he's doing and the minutes that he's playing, again, that's like an individualistic value that Kevin Durant holds for this team. And I don't know if it can be applied universally to what this team can accomplish and where they stand. I want to get your feedback on that, because I also would push back a little bit on the idea that this team could rise to top 5 in over a couple of weeks.
Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so let's get into that one in a second. I will say real quick, and I want to see where our friends over at Bet Online are having the Nets. Is like the slight difference in terms of like overall ranking. We'll make sure we kind of touch on that as well, because I think to some degree I find that to be the more accurate ranking, because it's just where you put your money where your mouth is. But we can hit on that in a second.
Okay, let's debate. Yeah, let's debate how high they could fly, and by the way, we probably agree on how low they could fall. Before we do, though, I got to tell you about our friends over at Masterclass. It's so good that they can even help you with linguistics if I wanted to go over and take a little swing at that. Why? Because with Masterclass, you can learn from the world's best artists, icons, leaders, anytime, anywhere, and at your own pace. You could learn about songwriting from John Legend, the legend of songwriting. You could also learn about the art of cooking from Gordon Ramsay. And I will say, the Gordon Ramsay one is very apt at this time of year. I have been affectionately referred to as King Goulash in my family circle because I like to get in the kitchen, I like to mix it up, and sometimes the results can have, not only the Brooklyn Nets, a bit of a spectrum in terms of the outcomes. But when you get over on Masterclass, you can do it at your own pace. The classes are 10 to 15 minutes long. You can do them on your phone, your tablet, your desktop, iOS, Apple, every single thing, Android. So it really gives you the ability to kind of sit back, do it at your own pace, and do them out of order. So if I think that Gordon Ramsay has a great way to prepare a nice, say, side for Christmas dinner, I can go ahead and jump ahead, get my feet wet on that one, follow his instructions, and hopefully find myself coming out the other side looking like a real king of Christmas dinner. An annual membership starts at just $15 per month, and over 2,500 video lessons from over 180 of today's most brilliant minds are available anytime, anywhere for you. You go ahead and you head over to the website right now. It's highly, from me, recommended that you check this out. This holiday, you can give the perfect gift to any annual Masterclass membership and get one free. So give one to your friend, get one for yourself, give one to your mother, get one for your daughter. Go over to masterclass.com/LockedOnNBA today. That's masterclass.com/LockedOnNBA. Terms apply.
And when you're done with that, head on over to our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain you've got the access to the best qualified candidates available. That's where you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. I said it yesterday. I wanted the Nets to put up over on LinkedIn Jobs the big 3-and-D wing, maybe a stretch 5. Throw that up on LinkedIn Jobs with the hashtag hiring frame, and that you're going to make sure you're spreading the word that you are hiring. That's what the Nets could maybe be in the market for. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
Okay, so before we look around this list a little bit, and then some teams, Nets are going to play the Hawks coming up next. There's like some real tie-ins around a lot of these teams, and then players that could be moving on these teams potentially. But as high as 5, I make the case that this team could be the 5th best team in the power rankings 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, I think that for the 5th best team in terms of title odds, maybe that's being a little bullish. Right now, if you look over at Bet Online, they are 7th in terms of overall championship odds. They're actually above teams like the Cavs, above teams like the Grizzlies in terms of the betting markets. If you go to a few other books, it's a little bit different, but in general, that's kind of where they land. I think the reason it's pretty simple, really. The reason they can reach heights that most other teams can't is because they have Kevin Durant. Like, I hate to always default to this is the reasoning behind why you can shoot top upside with a team like the Nets, is because we've seen time and time again, for you to reach those heights, you just have to have like one of the 5 best players, 6 best players in basketball.
Sure.
And a lot of these teams, when you're looking at just overall trajectory, a lot of them don't. Some might be nice stories, like a la the Kings. They're a nice story. It's if you're in Sacramento, it's been years of languishing, sort of just in irrelevance, and it's nice to kind of talk about them in a new way. But they just don't have the horses at all to like compete with a team that has because when you really go for it. And when you're really dialing it in, like you're going to play these other guys like major minutes. Now, in terms of just moving up the power rankings now, look, just getting Simmons back and playing 27 to 28 minutes a night automatically makes the team way better. And so just that alone, having played so long without him, Kyrie's still over on the course of the season missed a ton of games. These are just things that other teams haven't necessarily deal with. So I think that it's not hard to look at this team and say, hey, if things just kind of go right for a few weeks with injuries, which again with the Nets is asking a lot. I'm totally aware of this as the actual case. But it can happen where you just get 2 weeks of just health and running kind of good, but maybe running a little better on 3-point shooting. Some of these guys are coming around with some of their shooting. You get Yuta Watanabe back, who's been a key contributor. I think 2 weeks from now, we could easily be looking at them as having rattled off a few wins, and the schedule isn't too tough either. Like, they don't have that tough of a schedule over the next couple of weeks. So if you're looking at trying to evaluate a team like you said, like in prisoner of the moment stuff, the Nets are gonna go through a stretch of games here where their record should look okay.
Yeah.
And I think that alone is gonna probably vault them up.
Yeah, and I think so. It's like we're just talking about, like, through December here. I guess maybe the reason why I pushed it back, having kind of the schedule in my back of my mind, the way that you do accomplish it is when you look at Golden State for whatever they are or not. You said the needle's only pointing up with them, obviously defending champs, and then it's the Bucks, and then it's the Cavs. Like those 3 games, that's it. You go out, you win, like you win 2 out of those 3 games. All of a sudden, yes, now you're checking boxes. And by the way, we understand the margins that these power rankings are talking about. Nets are winning games. They don't care about the teams necessarily. They've already risen 4 over the last stretch here in the reiteration of them. But like, again, you go out and you tell me that you beat the Hawks, but then it's the Pacers and the Wizards, and you got Detroit in there too. Like, you're just not going to move the needle for me. And maybe it doesn't matter relative to where some of these other teams are, because when you expand it out and you think about these teams that are there, the thing I said before we got started was I got to go up to 6 before you get to like the Memphis Grizzlies at 15-9. Everybody else and every team has their issues and has their injuries and things that are going on for them that we don't necessarily hone our attention to the way we do with the Nets. But it's like the Clippers at 14-11. You mentioned the Kings at 13-9, the 13-12 Golden State Warriors, the 13-11 Dallas Mavericks. Nobody seemingly after those first few teams, it's just this hodgepodge. And maybe that's to the Nets' benefit in some ways beyond power rank. Is just the idea of like, seems like a lot of teams are trying to figure a lot of stuff out. And maybe to your point, in theory, a healthy Ben Simmons back and a Kevin Durant and a Kyrie Irving, all of a sudden you look at this team as a team, you say, yeah, why can't they rattle off wins? Why can't they be one of the more threatening teams? And we've said this over the last handful of seasons, by the way, too, when it comes to the betting lines as well, where we've disagreed with it at times because the Nets stayed way higher in championship odds than the micro would tell you about them. But they always stay in and around that range that is far more elevated than sometimes what the results would indicate. And that goes back to the Kevin Durant factor, just having good enough players, high enough caliber players that in theory, you can get to that place of being competitive for a championship.
Yeah, look, if you look at their next scheduled games, the 12 of their next games, they're almost definitely, if the things continue on this trajectory, Simmons coming back and no other injuries, they're going to be favored in 8 of the next 12 games, almost for sure. I'm not going to rattle it all off here, but like that is going almost definitely going to be the case. So if you're just trying to bet, if you're trying to look out over a long sample, that's one of the just easiest ways to do it. Is like, will they be favored in these games? Yes. Like that's how their schedule works out. There are a few Milwaukee's and Golden States thrown in there, Cleveland's, Toronto's, like some tougher ones. But by and large, these 12 games do really favor the Nets in terms of strength of schedule. So that for sure is going to look, should look pretty promising. Now, we do know about the Nets against the spread sort of record this season, following last year's trend, is bad because markets have a hard time getting a handle on this team. They were 10.5 point favorites last night going into Charlotte. That was looking like the easiest cover of all time in the first half. And then you're nail biting, and then you just know you're dust, like in the fourth quarter when the Hornets are coming back. This has been the story of the Nets over the last couple of seasons, that it's very difficult for independent, market folks like, ESPN or whatever to get a handle on it. It's very difficult for like actuarial folks that are just dialing this all the way in with analytics to get a handle on it. Like the Nets have been one of the all-time most difficult teams to just try to figure out. This season, they're 11-14-1 against the spread. Last season, I'm almost positive it was worse. I'll just double check real quick. But it just speaks to, I got this right here. Yeah, they were the second worst in the whole league, 33-52-2 against the closing line spread last year, which just means it's impossible. And by the way, these final closing lines are like so accurate because it's just, there's a reason betting and the house has figured this stuff out. Like over the long term, the closing line will be like right around 50%. Like you'll just, it's 50% on one side, 50% on the other. And they just have figured this stuff out. And the Nets historically cannot be figured out by markets or like maybe it is figured out. It's like you bet against their opponent every single time. Because if you did that over the last couple of years against the spread, not in just in terms of money lines and sides, but like against the spread, if you bet on their opponent, you probably quit your job at this point. Okay? Right. because you're absolutely crushing it. And maybe that is just like the thing to do. Maybe that's the thing that everyone should do. It's just like, hey, no one else can figure it out. Independent folks can't figure it out. The markets can't figure it out. and maybe just the play is to always just bet the other side.
Okay, so coming up in a second, I want to look at a couple of these teams that are right in and around them, and maybe at least at a minimum, while we can start to think about the Nets having a bit of a foothold as being one of the top 10, 12 teams in the league, no matter what, when you see some of the other teams behind them. And then also coming up with the Atlanta Hawks, they're sniffing right around the same kind of area in terms of the power rankings. Who are the teams that are going to see shifts that are going up and think that they should be adding to what they're doing, or trending down and maybe considering offloading some of their talent?
All right, before we do that, going to tell you about our aforementioned friends over at betonline.net, your number one source for betting info, stats, news, analysis. You get all the latest trends, all the latest action at BetOnline. Right now, Brooklyn Nets plus 1,600 to win the championship, slightly ahead of the Cavs, a little bit ahead of the Grizzlies, behind some of their teams like the Nuggets and the Clippers and the Suns, and obviously the Celtics, Bucks, and Warriors. That's some of the stuff you're going to find over at BetOnline. If you love podcasts, they are over there at BetOnline as well. It's the fastest and easiest way to get your betting fix in. Head on over to betonline.net. On that mobile device, you learn a little bit more about all the trends. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Okay, so I was curious about, we look at some of these power rankings, and I thought I'd just tie it in. Like, we don't get into these trade waters too much, whatever. But what is interesting is inside of the power rankings, the Atlanta Hawks, as we just mentioned before. And by the way, the Philadelphia 76ers, we didn't mention they're 14th and they're 12-12, and they have nothing but a needle pointing up as they finally get people back on the court for them as well. But the Atlanta Hawks are 15th and 13-11, and you've already heard, John Collins' name is getting thrown out there. I was hearing, and by the way, this guy need not be put in the same category, but the Knicks are already talking about, we're done with this Cam Reddish experiment. Let's get him on the market. Chicago is like teetering on this edge. What's going to happen? It is interesting to think about. This is power rankings adjacent, about the way the perception of your team and what you can accomplish is going to kind of dictate the choices you make heading towards the trade deadline, which then influences all the teams that feel like they're moving in the right direction. Well, all of a sudden, maybe there are going to be ways to even improve the team in key areas that you need to, and otherwise, sometimes being 10th, 5th, 2nd in the power rankings may not need nearly as much unless you think you have the critical components to win a chip.
Well, look no further than the Hawks, who the Nets play here tonight in this game. Like there's some unrest here. Like, they have dealing with injuries. Collins and Hunter is hurt. Hunter might be back in time for this game. Trae Young just sat out a full game because he disagreed with how like the injury management was going. Yeah. By the way, talk about not probably the national story it would have been if it had happened to, I don't know, some of the guys on the Nets if this had happened. I don't want to like call media out because I think that's kind of silly. I don't like to like sort of other situations as not being reported the same way. But like that's kind of a major thing. Like, he just didn't even come to the game.
He's a superstar player, disagreed with having to practice or not practice, and said, "I'm all good." And then just didn't show up. Just stayed at home. Like, that is, if anything, like that's not being made enough of. So anyway, if you're pointing to teams that just are maybe dealing with situations that could arguably be worse than the Nets and could find themselves on a different trajectory, I think the list there is pretty long. And this is the other case for the Nets. Like, if you want to be positive and glass half full about their prospects here, I mean, at least there doesn't seem to be inner turmoil right now. There's like basketball stuff that's going on and basketball problems, but it does seem, at least for now, that the fears around the Kevin Durant like happiness meter or whatever you want to put that at, like, that actually doesn't seem to be a problem, which probably is the best thing for the Nets, the best time for the Nets that you can look to right now. Because like, I think if you knew during the summer, even right after the trade request was effectively rescinded, that the team was going to be sitting right around 500, that it was going to kind of struggle. He was going to be playing the most minutes. Like, Simmons was going to have played in like half the games. And Kyrie, if Kyrie was like, he was going to have to sit out because of like a suspension. If you knew all that happened, you'd be like, oh, KD's on the block now. He might re-up it pretty soon, but that doesn't seem to be the way the wind is blowing. And I think as long as the wind is not blowing that way with the Nets, you do have to keep them really high also, because I think there is a narrative piece surrounding this team that's more important than it is for some other teams. Like, I do think the narrative around the Nets requires looking at more closely than it does most other teams, because I think other teams, you just kind of know what they are or whatever. But the Nets are a narrative-based team, unfortunately. And as long as that narrative seems like it's on the happy side of things, I do think you always have to be kind of bullish on their prospects. Yeah, well, that's like Luka and the Dallas Mavericks. They're not having the start of the season that they wanted to. But there's no question about Luka being a part of the Dallas Mavericks and whether or not that thing may fall apart, right? So you couch your perspective on their season inside of the fact that there's no question about your superstar. There's been questions about the Nets superstars. I'll ask you maybe a philosophical question, because I think it's funny. And we haven't gotten into this yet. We'll see as things start to come up here. But the Chicago Bulls have been like a team that gets mentioned as, hey, if you're looking to pick a carcass, keep your eyes on those Chicago Bulls. It's only a matter of time. But I thought about it when we tied it back to the idea that the Brooklyn Nets and wanting to add pieces. There's two things I thought about. One, that when the Nets want to go out a piece, and I think we said this maybe off podcast or on podcast, like Caruso, perfect fit. Let's go get him. Guess what? A lot of teams, especially contenders, look at Caruso and go, perfect fit. Let's go get him. So there's going to be other bidders in the market for these type of things. But more importantly, you and I said about reframing our perspective on the Nets and what they can accomplish this season and trying to just, hey, let's enjoy the games. Let's try to enjoy the wins. Let's analyze what they're doing game to game, week to week, and see where it goes from here. But for everyone from the outside to look at Chicago and go, you know what you guys should do? You should blow it up. Like you should really start selling off your assets. I think it's really easy to put that perspective onto another franchise, while at the same time, internally you'd say, hey, okay, it's a down year right now for the Bulls, but do you want to be irrelevant? Like that's what happens when you start to just get rid of pieces. And we know certain players like Vucevic in the last year of his contract, etc. But I think it's always easier to look at power rankings, to look at other rosters and go, you guys can't cut it. Why don't you give me that player for 5 cents on the dollar? Whereas it still matters for teams to stay competitive and put a product on the court night in, night out. That impacts the way the league operates when it comes to moves, trades, and then ultimately power rankings and title contenders.
And also, too, like the way they've smoothed out some of the draft odds in terms of the lottery, like it doesn't pay as much to totally tank these days. It's still better for sure to go all the way into the tank than not. And it's always better to decide early rather than later, which is a weird spot that some of these teams are in. Like, because I think that like you're going to see pretty soon, if they're not already there. I mean, the Hornets, the Pistons, the Magic, they're already there. Like they're 17 and 20-ish, each one of those teams, and it's over, right? But like they're so bad without even trying that they're just going to be, they're going to be at the bottom anyway. So like a team like the Bulls, it's not even going to be, it won't even pay to try to even catch these teams at the bottom, right? Like they're almost probably too good with DeRozan and Levine. So I do think you'll probably see them, like you said, just end up staying relevant-ish, just because it kind of doesn't make sense to do it the other way. Like they could never be bad enough. Like go try to be bad as the Pistons right now without Cade for the rest of the season. Like good luck. You won't be able to do it. Good luck being as bad as the Hornets are right now. Without LaMelo situation kind of all figured out. And then you got some of these other teams that are out kicking their coverage almost definitely on their overall skills, a la the Pacers and whatever. So I do think, yeah, it will be tough. I think it will be sometimes tough to pry a ton of assets away from these teams. Also, they might see like, hey, we could just trade Vooch and just be as good, right? Like, or whatever.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting point that you make, because there is also the other world of it where for some teams, and we're using the Bulls to say, you want to come get Vooch on his last year of his contract? You think he's a needle mover for you? Great.
We'll play Andre Drummond a bunch of minutes and like what's going to be like effectively the same thing, right? Like, I mean, Vooch is better, but like he's not light years better than Drummond is, right?
And also light years better relative to what you're trying to accomplish. Like Chicago Bulls, you're 9-14, couple wins, whatever. You want to tread somewhere near 500-ish. Well,
not winning a playoff series with Vooch, not winning a playoff series without Vooch. Like it doesn't, right. It just doesn't matter. Like it doesn't, it doesn't move the needle for where they are at all. And I'm not saying the Nets should go out and get this guy. I'm just saying, like, in terms of macro looks at some of these teams, I think you can kind of figure out where some of these teams are now. And like they don't, and even if they had like these, let's say the Bulls is just a case example, even if they had some kind of just total delusional thoughts around their team, they don't have the assets to get better anyway. So it doesn't end up even mattering.
One thing here, as we get out the door here, as you mentioned, Atlanta will be playing the Atlanta Hawks on Friday night. We'll see how it kind of fleshes itself out. I did just want to keep this one thread out there, too, because we're talking about the state of this team and where they are. In a game that you covered in the postgame live over on YouTube, where we always appreciate everybody, they were near even on rebounds. When you went inside to look at it, 66 points in the paint for the Charlotte Hornets. Again, I'm bringing this up to make sure we keep, for me personally, and I'm pretty sure you agree with me,
Somehow, by the way,
big,
somehow looked even worse. Like I know they had 66 points in the paint. It felt like 200. Like it felt like so many.
Oh, and by the way, and I'm going to keep drilling this point home. 29 points for Terry Rozier, and Oubre had 28 points, and they only took a combined 13 shots from beyond the arc. Like when you talk about sometimes, again, it keeps getting bogged down to it. I'm not saying you want to get it big. That's great. The penetration into the lane, setting up your shot, those aren't the bigs pulling up, 15 footers. Those are the guards that are making that happen. The lack of point of attack defense that the Nets don't have. They cannot stop guards from scoring on them. That remains the theme here. And that, I think, we talk about power rankings and where this team can go and who's going to be shedding contracts and what the Nets can do. That remains the biggest ire. And it still creates that tease for me about the bold move that the Brooklyn Nets should make, which, well, no. I'm not going to tell you. Not for another couple of weeks, probably.
All right, we're going to get out of here. Much appreciated everyone that's jumped in. No lives on YouTube over the weekend, but make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets to make sure you're getting those updates. Hit subscribe, hit notifications there too. You'll know when we're going live because we're going basically after every single game. We'll do a couple non-game ones live too also, maybe some mailbag stuff as well. So make sure you subscribe over on YouTube as we climb to 4,000. Would love to get to 4,000 subscribers before the new year. That is the goal. Be part of that goal. Hit like and subscribe at Locked On Nets YouTube.
Hey, man, when life gives you lemons, you just say F the lemons and bail. That's Chooch from Forgetting Sarah Marshall.
One of my threw his watch away because you know what? He had a cell phone. It was all good. One of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again next week talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.